I do recommend that you follow them in numerical order 1 through 12. You're certainly welcome to jump around if you like, but I would hate for you to miss out on some of the concepts that we continuously build on. Remember, in the first lesson, we talked about the approach to speaking, both physical and mental. We also focused quite a bit on breathing, which is at the core of everything that you do. In the second session, we really honed in on speaking anxiety, discomfort, fear, and what you can do about it. What are your lifelines? Very important things to know, tools that you have at your disposal in those critical moments. Then, of course, we were talking about how to take some of these concepts and apply them to business scenarios like meetings in lesson 3. So it was meetings as well as how do you practice and apply these public speaking techniques into daily communications, into daily life. Today, we're going to talk about habits that get in the way, speech behavior. We'll call them bad habits because the perception is not always positive when you do some of the things that you may be aware that you're doing, and some of them that you may not be aware that you're doing. We'll talk about those in just a moment, but I wanted to mention while we're talking about being on a journey, this journey that you are on, that you've decided to embark on, it never ends. I'm on the same journey myself. It's always a journey of balance. It's always a journey of growth and getting better. You get informed by the people that you interact with. You get informed by the positive experiences that you have, as well as the negative experiences. Those are great learning opportunities. But once you know what to look for and potentially where to go to find a solution, you're moving so much further on that journey. So I welcome you aboard. Here we have lesson 4, bad habits. There are a couple of things that people do that they realize that they do, but don't know how to stop. There are a couple of things that people do, but don't realize that they do, and only become very much aware of it once they hear a recording of themselves, or they see a playback from an online meeting, or they get some direct feedback from someone who has critiqued their presentation abilities. So the big ones are the use of filler words and sounds. We don't just call them words because some of them are sounds. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. Number 2 is speaking in a very flat and uninteresting tone. That's often referred to as a monotone, meaning one tone, very flat, not varying too much in pitch or in what we call intonation, which is a combination of pitch and rhythm. Then we have the idea that you might be speaking a little too quickly. Many people are fast talkers. We'll talk about what it feels like when you're aware of that, but you have no idea how to stop because it's become such a habit. We call that feeling like you're on a runaway train and you don't know where the brakes are. And finally, the last one is something that a lot of people are not aware of. It's what we call upspeak. And I'll get into that and describe what all of these things are one by one. These are the 4 big ones. And really, the things that you can do will help benefit you in whatever that speech behavior might be. But if you can make sure you're not doing any one of these 4, you're probably sounding like the really good speaker you want to be. Let's take them one at a time. First of all, we have filler words. And I usually pick out the top filler words that you hear other people use. Perhaps you're using them yourself. It's like, well, um, uh, you know. There are others, words that just keep getting repeated. And sometimes there are words that you kind of get fixated on within one session. It might be the word right or the word so. You might hear yourself, particularly in a recording, in that playback, saying something very repetitively. What we're talking about, these are the common ones. It's like, well, you know. So some of them are words and some of them are sounds. Now, why does this happen? There are a couple of reasons, and you'll see those listed here on the page as well. Sometimes you really do need time to think. If you're not sure about what you're going to say next, you might insert a filler word or a sound like and it sounds like you are thinking about what you're going to say next. However, making that sound also makes it sound like you don't know what you're going to say next. And taken even further in terms of a negative perception, it can sound like you don't know what you're talking about. So that's the problem with these filler words and sounds. All of these things are distractions. It's not just me being the public speaking police and saying you shouldn't do that. Once in a while, having a filler word or sound in there is good for effect. You can utilize it that way, but it's the repetition. It's the repetition of anything that starts to get a little boring. So maybe the motivation that started you on this path of behavior was that you needed a little bit of time to think. You could also be pausing because you don't want everything to run all together. You do want to make a distinction between sentences. So here is what I recommend that you do for filler words. And that is, if you go back to lesson number 1, we were talking about utilizing breathing and how by taking a deliberate breath, you are sending the body language message that you are thinking about what you're going to say next. But to the ears of your listener, it's much preferred that you take that deep breath rather than keep making sound and add in a filler word or a sound. Now, the other reason that breathing is such a good substitute for this, for filler word repetition, is because in order to make sound, as we have been talking about in just about every lesson, the air has to go out of your body. Um, uh, any sound, even when you're speaking, the air is coming out of your body. If you're breathing in, consciously, deliberately breathing in, the air is going in. It's very, very difficult to make a sound, and you probably wouldn't even try to do it if you were busier breathing in than breathing out. Now, the same perception and the same two motivators are satisfied. You are sending the message that you're thinking about what comes next, that you are measuring the importance of what you're about to say. It's also adding some really good rhythm and separation between your sentences, which leans right into a listener's behavior and satisfactions in that you're giving them a little bit of time to process. So you will begin to eliminate, and I have worked with clients and have been able to eliminate their filler words when they focus on their breathing. Remember, no one will think that you're doing it. They're simply going to think that you are thinking about what comes next. The second big habit that we want to try to avoid, and it's a difficult one, but it does rely on the same tools as our first filler words and sounds habit. And that is the drone of monotone, meaning one flat sound where it doesn't change all that much in rhythm and pitch. It can sound pretty boring and therefore sends the signal that you're not really committed to the words that you're saying. We've all heard it before. For some people, they're not even aware of how to break out of this habit. It could be because of a lack of breath. Because if you don't have a lot of vocal fuel, how are you going to support a sound that either rises, falls, stops, and starts? So it is that lack of support. Your body is actually pulling you back in and not giving you the freedom to really flow where your sense of commitment and your emotions can potentially take the words. And it does sound like a lack of commitment. It sounds like if it's not that interesting to you, then why should I be interested in it? And that's a big concept here in being a public speaker. I'm not saying necessarily to be overtly passionate and wear that on your sleeve, but even when you're being humorous, be committed to those words. So, what do you do? The monotone really does rely on breathing to be able to break out of this habit. If you take a nice deep breath, you're flowing, you're allowing the breath to go where it needs to go. You cannot change pitch going up and going down unless you have really good breath support. You will feel a lack of confidence in being able to change that around. And again, on the rhythm side of varying your intonation, when you're taking those deliberate breaths, you will be punctuating the things that you're saying. Now, if you add in the layer of coordinated gestures, which we have touched on in previous sessions and previous lessons, then you will begin to add much more punctuation and much more of a sense of you really being committed to the things that you're saying. It will be you using your body to actually have an impact on the sound of your voice. So remember, rely on your breathing and your gesturing to pull you out of the monotone trap. For our next bad speech habit that often occurs, sometimes you know about it, sometimes you're completely unaware of it, and that is speaking too quickly. For those who are aware of it, and it often rears its ugly head when you're in the spotlight because there is a tendency to want to keep the pace going. Sometimes, though, it can be a habit that occurs all the time. You might mistakenly think in order to keep the energy up and keep everybody's interest, you have to keep talking really fast. There also might be an understanding in your mind that you've got a lot of ground to cover, and the amount of time that you're given, the amount of attention span that you perceive people have is very short. Therefore, you're going to talk very quickly and try to get as much information in as you can. You might also be trying to prove your point that you, by circling around it, talking more and more and more about it, you will convince people that you're committed to it and that they too should adopt your perspective, your point of view. Then again, you may be around people who all speak too quickly, and you might feel that you have to keep up, whether you're in that scenario or it spills over into all of your daily communications. Speaking too quickly has way too many negative connotations. First of all, think about when someone is speaking much too quickly. It can seem like maybe they want that interaction to be over faster, so they're speaking really quickly. It could be that they're trying to prove that they're smarter than you. And that's never a good perception. You want to be on an equal plane with the people that you're communicating with. You might also think someone who's speaking really quickly is in fact nervous. Why else would they be speaking so quickly? Because we've all experienced that when someone has a more measured rate of speech, they seem so much more comfortable. So all of these things can have a bearing on you speaking too quickly. So what do you do about it? Speaking too quickly, and I know there's a common theme here with breathing and coordinated gestures. Often we're speaking too quickly because of a lack of breath support. Let me explain. There is a portion of your subconscious brain that is monitoring whether you have enough vocal fuel in the tank to finish saying whatever it is that you're trying to say. That vocal fuel is the air in your lungs. If you've taken a really shallow breath, immediately the idea goes into your head and eventually into your body to speed up because you're going to run out of gas. And that could very well be the case. Now, that's how it starts. But then it starts to become a habit, and so does shallow breathing. The way to break the habit, as with any human behavior, is to make a change in your approach. My suggestion is that you try taking a nice deliberate breath. And again, utilize the perfect shield that I have described. Breathing in deeply shows that you're really measuring the importance of your word, that you're lending more gravitas to what it is that you're saying, that you are truly committed to those words. And again, we go back to that sense of projecting authenticity, which is so important in the equation of authenticity leads to trust, leads to persuasion. So focus on your breathing, because I find that simply trying to remind yourself to slow down won't work. There's too much going on. You've got to rely more on your body to fix some of these things that are speech habits, speech bad habits. Let's go to the last of our speech habits for today. And this is a sneaky one. It's called upspeak. What do I mean by upspeak? What I mean is someone who is in the habit of always ending every sentence going up at the end, because, well, there's a couple of reasons why it might be happening. And you hear it often in people who are trying to tie information together because they want to indicate that there's more to come. Meaning, don't don't think that I'm done because I have more to say. And then this happened. What it does is it makes it sound like everything is a question when everything isn't a question. So you want to be able to end a little bit more definitively. I understand that the habit begins with the idea of, well, there is more to come, so I want to keep it going. But because you're saying something that sounds like a question when it isn't, it can be perceived that you're asking for validation, that you're not sure. You're asking for that person. Therefore, it's a less of a level of commitment in terms of the way that you're speaking. You want to make sure that you actually take the pitch of definitive sentences down at the end. Now, it may begin with an idea that there is more to come and I have more to say, but it also might have to do with that old tool that we've been talking about all lesson long, which is breathing. If you have a lack of breath support, it's easier to go up than it is to go down because you have to follow through physically with the air vibrating your vocal cords. So here, your breathing could be what is sabotaging you and causing you to utilize upspeak. So remember, listen for these things. If you do have an opportunity to record yourself and listen to how you're speaking these words, is the perception the way that I want to be viewed? Do I sound committed to my words? Am I adding in too many filler words? If I were listening to myself as an unbiased third person, would I think that I didn't know what I was talking about? Would that be a perception that I don't want to persist? Could it be that I'm speaking too quickly and therefore I'm sending negative perceptions? Is my tone too flat? Am I not allowing the rhythm and the pitch to go up and down? Can I explore doing that? I recommend using some of the sentences that were offered in lesson one. Utilize those, try coordinating your gestures along with your breathing, and see what happens to your intonation. You will begin to lose that monotone. Also, make sure that you scan for upspeak. It's very, very common. I see it more and more. And I do recommend that you try to make the melody go down at the end. It doesn't mean it has to exclusively do that. Certainly, there are times after prepositional phrases or when you're asking a question where the pitch can go up. And it doesn't always sound like a question, but with speech behavior, if you repeat the same thing over and over and over again, you begin to lose your audience.